Is it better to rent or to own in retirement? It was a very, very common question. One of the oldest in the book, actually. A lot of people in my area, which is Southwest Florida, Tampa, Clearwater area, are moving from other states and buying new homes. But should they be renting? That's the question. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Tony Shore, here we are.
Here
Welcome
we
to the
are.
show. Um, you know, I want to bring up the biggest factor that goes into this decision that maybe not it's I feel it's the biggest factor, but maybe not people that are doing it, going through it, don't feel it that way. Um, I will say also that this is both an emotional slash social decision versus a financial decision. And I lean financial. So there are some emotional aspects of owning versus renting that we need to factor in.
Sure.
But one of the biggest, and the reason why I'm bringing it up now, and for those that are watching on YouTube may have noticed I'm not in my usual space. It's because my office kind of felt the pain of the hurricanes in Florida, leaky roof. And yesterday, Shelly, my admin, and I were chatting in the office, and we heard a boom and a smoke started pouring through the vents, like like you see in a
Oh,
James Bond movie. It just started
oh my
coming down.
gosh.
So, um, but it turned out to be I guess some water from the storm got into the air handler unit and fried it, and so it was burnt rubber and smoke. And but guess what, Tony? I
What?
don't own it, so I call up the landlord and say, "New problem,
Mm.
yours, not mine." And I'm sure you have. Oh, actually, you do have some recent trials and tribulations associated with home ownership.
I've got a story that
Uh,
plays right into that, Dan. Just yesterday, woke up, went downstairs, heard a whooshing sound, opened the door to my laundry room, and there was water everywhere and water spurting out of the side of a pipe. So
it's who do you call? Who's the homeowner?
I am. So then I had to scramble. It's like I had to wake my wife up, who was going to sleep in and work from home yesterday. That got spoiled. And I go, honey, you got to find the number to the city water department because it looks like it's by the meter. I was hoping it was their meter that they had installed in our house. Turns out, no, I got a hold of a guy from the city. He came right out, shut our water off. He had to dig up my yard to find the key to shut off the main coming into the house.
Yeah.
So now I've got a hole in my yard. And then he came in and said, nope, look, the hole's right over here in this pipe. That's not our meter. I'm like, great, what do I do? And he goes, call a plumber. Can you recommend anyone? We're not allowed to recommend plumbers.
Mhm.
And I'm like, of course
Mm,
you're not.
yeah,
so
Minnesota. You
so
can't
then
be helpful. Minnesota
and then
nice right there.
I called 6 plumbers, didn't hear back from any of them after 2 hours.
Nice. I
So the
thought that was
sev-
a Florida thing.
So nobody called me back, and then the couple I got a hold of, oh no, we'll be there Monday, and I'm like, well, the water's shut off to my house, can't use the can't shower,
Right.
can't use the bathroom. I need this fixed because the shut off valve inside the house doesn't work. So we tried closing that, and it didn't stop the water, so it had to be shut off at the street. So I had to get a plumber out before our water could be turned back on, is the moral of the story. So, but I'm the homeowner, I'm fully responsible. And now, over $3,900 later, because all my valves were not to code and out of leaky, and
Mm.
I knew that. I knew we had bad pipes in there, so I just did
You
it.
knew it. You knew it was coming. And we
Yeah.
did a show on emergency expenses, what you should have. And I said
Yep.
you don't need that much for retirement, but this is one of those cases. And you're not retired. So however, um, this is primarily the big thing people focus on as well. I don't want to have to do the maintenance. My roof goes, blah, blah. Those are the big expenses that the water
Right.
heater. And so home ownership versus rent, that's usually the conversation, but that's not where I'm going with this, especially when it comes to retirement. Um, a- Again, it's definitely a big factor though. And the social aspect of it is, people, especially the boomer generation, feels like I'll take my dad for an example. He bought his first house in 1960s, probably $15,000, $20,000. And then when he moved to Florida, he sold the house for, I don't know, 300, 400,000, good return
Yep.
after paying off 4 colleges there,
Yeah.
which we'll get to in the next show.
Okay.
But he 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 moved to Florida and bought. He didn't rent. It was never even a
Right.
discussion point. I'm
Nope.
not gonna rent. Why would I rent?
Yeah.
But I
It's a
found
point of pride, right? People
I think so.
There's a social stigma with owning your own home, especially for boomers and some Gen Xers, right? People in retirement, it's a
Yeah.
point of pride. "Where do you live?" "Oh, I live in an apartment." "Oh, okay."
Yeah, and, like, even in the Villages, which is a big retirement community in Florida, there's the
Yeah.
renter section and there's the homeowner section, and it's like, "Oh, they're in that." And, again, this is keeping up with the Joneses, caring more about what other people think rather than what's best for you. And,
Right.
a recent study, um there's a Florida Gulf Coast University here in Southwest Florida. They have the Lucas Institute for Real Estate Development. I'll put the link down there. They do a lot of real estate discussions and reports, so you can review those. But recently, what they're saying is, believe it or not, Tony, even with rents out of control because there's not a lot of space, it's actually cheaper to rent than it is to buy in Southwest Florida area. I think they said like 94 out of the 98 spots they looked, it's cheaper to rent, which,
Wow.
you know, and so what does that mean? What do you mean cheaper to rent? And it's because you're factoring the cost of taxes, insurance, and not saying you don't have renters insurance, but especially now. So I
Well,
think this is
property taxes are crazy.
well, and also people that are watching. I have several clients that lost a lot in these storms, and they're questioning: Do I buy? Do I keep? Do I just sell this and walk? Because they can't go to the landlord, who is themselves, and say, "I'm walking. I'm out. I'm going to rent in Orlando. I'm done with these storms." They own this house. They need to figure it out. And we just did a show on getting the losses written off. A lot of people couldn't afford or didn't think flood insurance applied or didn't cover what they thought. And so now they're sitting on this big loss and they're questioning, why do I want to be a homeowner here? Like with my story, I was able to say, well, AC's out. There's a roof leak. I'm out of the office. Landlord, fix it. Not going to cost me anything except time and energy away from the office. But for these people that are living in these areas that are subjected to these storms in recent days and months, they're questioning maybe renting is a better option, right?
Right.
So again, though, that's not the big factor. For me, I want to bring up what I feel is the biggest factor, and that's home equity. See, we've done shows, I'll put them up here, on how to access your home equity. We'll go back to my dad. Let's say he bought the house. I don't really know the exact numbers, but let's say he paid cash, which he did. He sold his house, used it to buy a brand new, not a brand new home, a home new to him. He doesn't have a mortgage. He paid it off. He pocketed the difference. Let's say it's worth 300,000, probably worth 400,000 now. He's sitting on 400,000 of equity in his home. He's got his pension from being a high school teacher and Social Security. That's his only income. He doesn't have a big IRA or anything spitting out income to him. So he's sitting on this and he's living within that. But he's sitting on a $400,000 home. He's in charge of the maintenance. He's in charge of any HOA. He's in charge of fixing things.
And property
But
taxes.
and property taxes, right? But if he wants to spend 50,000 on something, where is he going to go? He can't. He'd have to tap into the home. What renting? Now let's imagine my dad said, I am done with this. Now, he didn't have any property damage. He wasn't in the storm's path and he's not in the flood zone. And that was a decision when we were buying, to look for that.
Sure.
But let's say he's like, I am done with this. I'm renting now. I'm going to move somewhere else and rent, and I'm selling my home. And he takes the proceeds, let's call it 400,000. What does he do with it then? Renting allows him to access that equity. Now he can invest that. He could buy a CD at 4%, right? And there's 16 grand a year in interest. That'll cover rent, maybe. Maybe not all of it, but you know, I think what people fail
Well,
to
if your
consider.
dad knew a good financial advisor, he could give that money to him,
Oh,
and then they could
exactly.
help him.
It may be. depending on his risk level and so on. But people aren't thinking there's this thing with that's my house, right? And of course, he's not going to walk away from selling his house and not have a house cost. He's going to have rent, and
Yeah.
you don't have control over that. That could be raised. Your landlord could kick you out. How long is your lease? So there's some unknown there. But think of the equity that you now have access to that you can use for other things or invest to generate income for you to augment your income. It's like taking a reverse mortgage, except with a reverse mortgage, you're staying in the home. With renting, you're not forced to stay there. So you give up a little bit of control, but you access that equity. I think that's the big thing people fail to consider. Now, what are you losing by giving up by taking that equity? Who loses in that situation? Me and my three brothers would, right? Because
Right.
if my dad dies and leaves me the house, we inherit that house at the value. No taxes due. It's a step up, right? If he invests in the stock market, the same thing. But if he takes it and buys a CD or a fixed annuity or something like that, we inherit that money and we have to pay tax on the gains. Um, so, and what if my dad, and this is something I preach, what if I told my dad, and I think you would tell your dad the same, sell the house, right? Rent elsewhere, and
Yep.
then spend that money. Don't leave it for me. If you have 400,000 sitting in the bank, invest it. If it's not enough to live and you want to go on trips, you want to go and buy, things to improve your lifestyle, to retrofit, your car or whatever you need, do it. So instead of having 400,000, you have 300,000 to leave to the kid. But some people legacy is important. But I and maybe I don't know what you think about this, Tony. I think that people are more inclined to keep the house because that's just what you do, as opposed to keeping the house so that they can leave it to little Johnny, who probably doesn't want the house anyway. I think
Right.
it's more social, emotional attachment to the house as opposed to leaving a legacy.
Right. Rarely do your adult children inherit a house and keep it. They sell it and split the proceeds or take the proceeds.
Right. So
Right.
why not take the proceeds yourself and use it on yourself as opposed to giving it to the next generation?
Sure.
You
Or at
know,
least a portion
uh,
of it.
right. You could downsize, right? And so I think that's something that people are starting to now question, particularly in those areas that were hit by the storm, because you know, you fixing pipes from the 1970s, that's an expected expense at some point, right? A new roof replacement is not something like, oh my God, what is this you speak of? I have to
Yeah.
replace my roof. People aren't doing that. But a hurricane taking and knocking out the first floor of your home and having to replace everything down to the studs, that's something, like, wait a sec. Is what am I doing again? Right.
Yeah.
So
It's tough.
I think it's a highly personal decision. You're right. It's good to have someone going through it with you, and a 20-minute, 15-minute conversation between you and I is not going to solve it for anybody. But I want people to remember that they're tying up, I put that in quotes, tying up their equity in their house when and fine, maybe they want to leave it to the next generation. But I think for most people, they're like, yeah, I wouldn't mind having that. And I have a feeling that especially if someone's tight on a tight budget, they can hardly afford to live there with the taxes and maybe they have a mortgage, the insurance, especially um casualty insurance on the water in Florida or
Oh,
Alabama.
yeah.
They're starting to say, I can't afford this lifestyle. Yet they're sitting on a ton of equity in the home, which does them no good because the insurance company is not going to be like, oh yeah, we'll just write us an IOU and we'll collect when you die. Um, I think people are starting to really question whether or not it makes sense to own anymore.
Yeah. Well, and especially, like you said, in certain areas of Florida, especially, you really have to take a strong look at it. And you're right. This is a timely topic, Dan, because a lot of Floridians are looking at that saying, hey, is it worth owning and rebuilding?
Right. And so you have to do the numbers. You can't just, well, I'm just going to rent. And what I often tell people, especially when they're moving from out of state, don't just buy right away. Rent. A lot of them snowbird and they get a feel and so that's okay. But
Yeah.
for those that are just like, I'm moving to Florida, right?
Yeah.
During COVID, that was a big thing. Rent for a little bit. Familiarize yourself with the area, understand the flood maps, and then say, you know what? Maybe I'll continue to rent. Maybe I like this lifestyle of maybe going somewhere new or different. Or then you say, all right, I'll buy, but maybe I don't need as much stuff. That's the other thing. It's like when you rent, it's like I can't have all my stuff. Where am I going to put? I used to have a big house, and now the people rather than get rid of stuff, they just buy
Yeah.
something that'll fit their stuff,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, look behind me. That's my problem. I would much rather rent and know I just have this fixed amount every month I pay, and then I'm done. There's no more added expenses,
Right,
because home ownership, as we all know, is just a never-ending stream of expenses and taxes and things. But
right.
I have, 3,500, 4,000 records behind me, and a lot of equipment here in my home studio. An apartment isn't gonna work for that, so, especially not with my
No,
wife. "Honey, can we turn the entire living room into a record room in our
I
apartment?"
think they made a movie about that. Some guy retired and bought a radio station and then lived out of it. I think that would be a
Yeah,
good little
yeah,
reality show for you, all right?
I remember that.
So, yeah, don't forget that home equity. That's a big factor. And when you're thinking about renting versus buy, just consider what you do with that equity. And if it's, oh, I'm just going to go blow it at the Hard Rock Casino, that's a different story. But if it's investing smartly and maybe using it to improve and enhance your lifestyle, maybe it's worth giving up a little bit of the freedom that you have by being a homeowner and renting. Maybe it can increase your overall lifestyle.
Yeah,
Something to consider. So that's it, Tony. Thanks for a good show,
yep,
and hopefully we'll fix our house issues, and we'll be back. I'll fix my office issues. And I'll be back in the office sooner than later.
yeah.
Catch everyone next week.
All matters discussed in today's show are for informational purposes only.
This show is not investment advice.
Dan Wendol nor Dolphin Financial Group are affiliated or endorsed by any government agency.
Investment advisory services are offered through Dolphin Wealth Management, Inc., a registered investment advisor in the state of Florida.
Insurance products and services are offered through Dolphin Insurance, Inc.
Dolphin Wealth Management, Inc. and Dolphin Insurance, Inc. are affiliated companies doing businesses as Dolphin Financial Group.
You should talk to someone at Dolphin Financial Group before implementing any of these strategies or ideas.